Next, I want you to delve with me into abstract art. Abstract art is art that does not attempt to depict an accurate representation of a visual reality, but rather uses shapes, colors, figures, and gestural marks to achieve its effect. Strictly speaking, the word abstract means to separate or remove something from something else. The term can apply to art based on an object, figure, or landscape, where the forms have been simplified or schematized. It also applies to art that uses forms, such as geometric or gestural figures, that do not originate in an external visual reality. Some artists of this pure abstraction have preferred terms such as concrete art or non-objective art, but in practice, the term abstract is used more broadly, and the distinction between the two is not always obvious. Abstract art is often considered to have a moral dimension in the sense that it can represent virtues such as order, purity, simplicity, and spirituality. Since the beginning of the 20th century, abstract art has formed a central current of modern art. Abstraction. Over a century, the Cubist and Fauvist artists drew on the visual world for their subject matter, but opened the door to more extreme approaches to abstraction. The pioneers of pure abstract painting were Kazimir Malevich and Piet Mondrian, between approximately 1910 and 1920. A pioneer of abstract sculpture who was inspired by the modern world was the Russian constructivist Naum Gabo. My selected artists working with abstraction: Piet Mondrian 1000, 872 1944. Wassily Kandinsky is generally considered the pioneer of abstract art. However, a Swedish artist named Hilma af Klint 1862 1944 could claim that title. Farunisa Kabachla, the 6th of December 1901, the 5th of September 1991, was a Turkish artist best known for her large-scale abstract paintings with kaleidoscopic patterns, as well as for her drawings, lithographs, and sculptures. Zayed was one of the first women to attend art school in Istanbul. Wassilievich Kandinsky, the 4th of December 1866, the 13th of December 1944. There are numerous theoretical ideas behind abstract art, while some have embraced the idea of art for art's sake, that art should focus exclusively on creating beautiful effects. Others have proposed that art can or should be like music, in the sense that just as music is composed of sound patterns, the effects of art should be created through pure patterns of form, color, and line. The idea, derived from the Greek philosopher Plato, that the highest expression of beauty lies not in the forms of the real world, but in geometry, is also used in the debate about abstract art, as is the idea that abstract art, by not representing the material world, can be considered a representation of the spiritual. Since the 1960s, at least, we have become accustomed to viewing post-World War II art through the lens of the rivalry between New York and Paris. At most, some of us recognize the existence of peripheries, local champions whom we appreciate, but whom we don't think of as competing in the same league as New Yorkers or Parisians, whether from San Francisco, Berlin, Barcelona, or St. Ives. Only very recently have efforts been made to consider a broader truly international landscape, united by stylistic trends or a common chronology. This globalized vision leads logically to the idea that the dominant tendency of post-war art was what I would call an international abstract expressionism with local variants, a largely anachronistic notion, but even more effective in retrospect. In the era of abstract expressionism, such a global vision was undoubtedly anathema to French and American critics and artists. For those in France who sensed impending defeat, the reaction, at best, was to attempt to build a rearguard alliance. The French critic and curator Michel Tapier, who organized exhibitions on both sides of the Atlantic, including the first Jackson Pollock show in Paris in 1952, hatched the idea in 1954 of a Pacific school that bypassed New York, uniting West Coast artists with the School of Paris, as well as with Japanese painters. For American critics, the consequences of the dispute were too far-reaching to even acknowledge the existence of an American interest in Parisian artists as early as 1947. Clement Greenberg consciously omitted New York exhibitions of French painters when he made his monthly rounds for Partisan Review. Only in England did it become customary to consider the existence of an international movement. This perspective was shared by critics and artists alike before the rise of pop art made it possible to forge a strictly binational alliance, this time between New York and London. In 1949, the art critic Dennis Sutton identified the challenge of American art, but added that European and American painting must be studied together, citing in the same pages the rich paste of Nicolas de Staël and the dramatic design of Hans Hartung's stabbing forms, rhythms, and exploration of the unconscious. He heralded a kind of international curiosity that helps explain why the English reception of Tapier's influential exhibition, Opposing Forces, when it was shown at London's ICA in 1953, was quite different from that in Paris. There, the presence of American painters like Pollock was quickly dismissed as a mere variation on similar French experiments. For example, that of Jean Dubuffet. While in London, although the exhibition was considered somewhat confusing and Pollock's paintings were generally ridiculed, there was a tendency to regard all contemporary abstract artists in the same way, united by a common style and gestural process, as can be seen in Patrick Heron's review, which singled out with suspicion both Pollock and Georges Mathieu, as well as Jean-Paul Riopel. However, perspectives changed as opportunities to see new American paintings increased. The Modern Art in America exhibition, organized by MoMA and presented at the Tate in 1956, prompted some young critics, such as Lawrence Alloway and David Sylvester, to embrace American abstract expressionism as the most vital trend of their time, and British abstract painters quickly followed suit. In 1956, Alloway was able to report to an American correspondent, "I have just returned from a visit to St. Ives, and there, too, American styles are clearly discernible in the young artists." In March 1956, Heron wrote of the American artists seen at the Tate. Their creative emptiness represented a radical discovery. I felt, as did their flatness, or rather their spatial shallowness. And he concluded his review, "We shall now watch New York with the same interest as Paris for new developments." This shift in balance was clear when he wrote, in May of the same year, about the stale retrospective at the Whitechapel Gallery. Although he could no longer give unreserved acclaim, he still admired The non-figurative works produced between 1946 and 1950 and the abstract figurative paintings of 1950, 1952. Indeed, Heron's own work of 1955-56 showed the profound impact of both Rothko and Stale, with paintings composed of a juxtaposition of vivid, translucent patches of color. Garden Leaves, 1955, and Azalea Garden, 1956. Simultaneously evoked Rothko's number 1948-9, shown at the Tate, and Stay Else Blue Grounded Studio Coin, 1955, included in the Whitechapel, one of the last works, in which the French painter abandoned thickness in favor of fluidity, as he sought to find that fine line between absolute form and the absolutely formless. Heron's more geometric paintings of 1957-9, made of a succession of irregular stripes with a tonal progression, would record the influence of the so-called classic Rothkos of the 1950s. Not forgetting the horizontal layers of color he had admired in the Stairs Sea and Sky paintings of 1952-3. This international approach to contemporary abstract painting extended to the next generation of British painters, even as they explicitly struggled with the St. Ives ethos. The young William Green, who was at the Royal College of Art from 1957 to 1959, thus combined the impact of American action painting, popularized through the photographs and films of Pollock at work, with the spectacularization of painting used by Matthew in creating his The Battle of Hastings for his 1956 exhibition at the ICA. His bitumen paintings of 1957-8 were made by throwing tar onto large panels placed on the floor, over which he sometimes rode his bicycle. The title of one 1957 painting, Napoleon's Chest in Moscow, now destroyed, even showed a willingness to rival the French artist's somewhat ironic relationship with history, while another work from the same year was titled Patricia Owens, after a Canadian actress who had just left British cinema for Hollywood. In the autumn of 1956, in Arc, the RCA magazine, the art critic Robert Melville published an essay considering action painting as practiced by Green and his RCA contemporaries, Richard Smith and Robin Denny, a trend observable in New York, Paris, and London. In a 1957 essay, Alloway agreed that this was the best way to describe an international trend of which these young British painters were the most promising heirs. He cited among its practitioners not only American artists but also French painters such as Pierre Soulages, whom he quoted, "I work guided by an inner impulse, a longing for certain forms, colors, materials, and it is not until they are on the canvas that they tell me what I want." But in the late 1950s, the main focus for considering abstract painting as a unified field of experience, involving artists from North America and Europe, remained that of a renewed connection with nature, or, more precisely, with the landscape. Since the late 1940s, Peter Lanyon had adopted the dark structuring of fluid impressions that could be seen in the abstract landscapes of de Staël or Jean Bazaine, whose taste for places where sea meets land he shared, replacing the inspiration of Normandy or the Côte d'Azur with that of Cornwall. From 1956, he began to include some gestural passages, hinting at a dialogue with the abstract landscapes of Willem de Kooning, such as Easter Monday of 1955-6. The way he suggested an elevated viewpoint in much of his work from the end of the decade resonated with similar devices used by Sam Francis, a Californian who had been living in Paris since 1950. His Lost Mine, 1959, fused upward and downward directions, as Francis had been doing since his early Californian paintings. Related movements. Cubism. Cubism was a revolutionary approach to depicting reality, invented around 1907-1908 by artists Pablo Picasso and Georges Braque. They brought together different perspectives of subjects, usually objects or figures, into a single image, resulting in paintings with a fragmented and abstract appearance. Cubism was one of the most influential styles of the 20th century. It is considered to have begun around 1907 with Picasso's celebrated painting, Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, which included elements of the Cubist style. The name Cubism appears to derive from a comment by critic Louis Vaucel, who, upon seeing some of Georges Braque's paintings exhibited in Paris in 1908, described them as reducing everything to geometrical contours, to cubes. Cubism opened up almost infinite possibilities for the treatment of visual reality in art and was the starting point for many subsequent abstract styles, including constructivism and neoplasticism. By breaking down objects and figures into distinct areas or planes, artists sought to show different viewpoints simultaneously and within the same space, thus suggesting its three-dimensional form. In this way, they also emphasized the two-dimensional flatness of the canvas rather than creating the illusion of depth. This marked a revolutionary break with the European tradition of creating the illusion of real space from a fixed viewpoint through devices such as linear perspective, which had dominated representation since the Renaissance. Fauvism is the name applied to the work produced by a group of artists, including Henri Matisse and André Derain, between approximately 1905 and 1910, characterized by strong colors and fierce brushstrokes. The name Les Fauves, the Beasts, was coined by the critic Louis Vaucel after seeing the work of Henri Matisse and André Derain at an exhibition, the Salon d'Automne in Paris, in 1905. The paintings that Derain and Matisse exhibited were the result of a summer spent working together in Collioure, in the south of France, and were executed with intense, unnaturalistic colors, often applied straight from the tube, and loose, unrestrained brushstrokes. The forms of the subjects were also simplified, giving their works a rather abstract feel. Other related artists associated with Fauvism included Georges Braque, Raoul Dufy, Georges Rouault, and Maurice de Vlaminck. Suprematism, the name given by the artist Kazimir Malevich to the abstract art he developed from 1913 onward, characterized by basic geometric shapes such as circles, squares, lines, and rectangles, painted in a limited range of colors. The first proper exhibition of suprematist paintings took place in December 1915 in St. Petersburg at the O.10 exhibition. The exhibition included 35 abstract paintings by Kazimir Malevich, including the famous black square on a white ground, State Tretyakov Gallery, Moscow, which headed the list of his works in the catalog. Constructivism. Constructivism was a particularly austere branch of abstract art founded by Vladimir Tatlin and Alexander Rodchenko in Russia around 1915. Constructivists believed that art should directly reflect the modern industrial world. Vladimir Tatlin was crucially influenced by Pablo Picasso's Cubist constructions. Construction 1914. Which he saw in his Paris studio in 1913. These were three-dimensional still lifes made from scrap materials. Tatlin began creating his own works, but they were completely abstract and made from industrial materials. Abstraction creation. Abstraction creation was an association of abstract artists created in Paris in 1931 with the aim of promoting abstract art through group exhibitions. Abstraction Creation's leaders were Auguste Herbin and Georges van Tongerloo, but all the important abstract painters participated, including figures such as Naum Gabo, Wassily Kandinsky, and Piet Mondrian, and it quickly acquired around 400 members. American abstract artists. Abstract expressionism. Abstract expressionism is the term applied to the new forms of abstract art developed by American painters such as Jackson Pollock, Mark Rothko, and Willem de Kooning in the 1940s and 1950s. It is often characterized by gestural brushstrokes or marks and the impression of spontaneity. Gestural. Gestural is a term used to describe the application of paint in free-sweeping gestures with a brush. The term originally came into use to describe the painting of abstract expressionist artists Jackson Pollock, Willem de Kooning, Franz Klein, Robert Motherwell, Hans Hofmann, and others, also known as action painters. In Pollock's case, the brush could be a dry one or a stick, dipped in the paint and fanned out onto the canvas. He also poured directly from the can. The idea was for the artist to physically act out his inner impulses and for the viewer to read something of his emotion or mood in the resulting paint marks. De Kooning wrote, "I paint this way because I can keep putting more and more things into it. Drama, anger, pain, love. Through your eyes, it becomes an emotion or an idea. Again, this painting approach has its origins in expressionism and automatism, especially in the painting of Joan Miro. In his 1970 work, Abstract Expressionism, Irvine Sandler distinguished two branches of the movement, the gesture painters and the color field painters. The term gestural has come to be applied to any painting done in this manner. My name is José Antonio Galán, and I'm a painter from Triana, a beautiful and vibrant neighborhood in Seville, Spain. I have a gallery with my works displayed in the metaverse. If you search for me on Medium as Galán Vázquez, you'll be able to see my artwork from my early academic years, before I dedicated myself to abstraction. I hope you enjoy my paintings as much as I enjoyed creating them."